Listen, back in Oak Ridge, the story of Grandma Eleanor and that scruffy dog Teddy is basically legend status. Ask anyone at the local spot, and they'll tell you the same thing. The whole town got straight up bamboozled by how it all went down. The vibes were crazy. Before the fireworks, Eleanor's life was, well, ghost town quiet. Her husband Silas had kicked the bucket like a century ago. And her kids, I swear, they were always ghosting her. They moved to the big city, probably chasing clout or some fat paychecks, leaving her in that massive, creaky old Victorian house all by her lonesome. The silence in that place was deafening, real empty nest vibes. Then came that one Tuesday. The rain was coming down hard, making the whole world look gloomy and bleak. Eleanor, who wasn't usually the type to sit and mope, was feeling pretty beat. She was just about to zonk out on the couch when she heard a pathetic little whimper. She stepped outside, squinting through the drizzle, and spotted him. He was the definition of scraggly. A tiny, soaking wet golden mutt, absolutely beat from the rain. He looked like he'd been through the ringer, starving and totally lost. Most people at Oak Ridge would have capsized the situation and ignored him, calling him a stray. But Eleanor? Nah, she's got heart. She scoops him up, brings him inside, dries him off, and fixes him a bowl of warm milk and leftover chicken. "Ain't no one capping on you today, little guy," she says. She named him Teddy, which was kinda basic, but it fit. At first, Teddy was just your average shelter pup. He was shook from whatever had happened to him, but once he realized Eleanor was the real MVP, he became her absolute hype man. This dog didn't just chase his tail. He had main character energy. He'd just sit there, staring at Eleanor with these big, soulful eyes, like he knew a secret and was just waiting for her to catch up. But the real weirdness started at night. You see, Eleanor's house was old school. In the back, there was this massive, dusty-ass storage room, full of Silas's old junk. Eleanor rarely went in there. The vibes were too creepy. But Teddy, this dog, was obsessed. Every night, around 2 a.m., he'd sneak out of her room, crawl under the creaky floorboards, and start scratching like a maniac. "Cut that noise, Teddy! You're gonna give me a headache," Eleanor would holler, thinking it was just a mouse or some sketchy pest. She had no clue. Not a single clue that this dog wasn't looking for a snack. He was on to something. Then came that night. That horrible, soul-crushing night. It was past midnight. The whole town was dead silent. Eleanor was totally zonked, dreaming of better days. But in the kitchen, a faulty wire in the wall started sparking. Just one little spark. But that old Victorian wood, it caught on fire faster than you can say lit. Within minutes, the whole downstairs was ablaze. Smoke was thick, black, and totally sketchy, creeping up the stairs. Eleanor was still sleeping like a baby, completely oblivious to the fact that her world was turning into a furnace. Teddy, of course, was already on it. The smoke woke him up, and the heat made him realize it was go time. He rushed into Eleanor's room and started barking like his life depended on it. He was jumping on her, pulling her blankets with his teeth, growling, pushing her shoulder with his wet nose. He was basically screaming, "Yo, we gotta bounce, now!" Eleanor woke up, completely disoriented and shook. "Teddy, what is it?" she mumbled. Then she caught the smell. The orange glow creeping under her bedroom door was unmistakable. She opened the door, and the vibes were instantly apocalyptic. The hallway was filled with a thick wall of fire. "Oh my God! We're toast, Teddy!" she cried. The heat was already singing her eyebrows, and her breath was catching in the smoke. Panic set in, and she completely lost her cool. But Teddy didn't blink. This dog had steel in his veins. He knew the floor plan better than she did, and he was already pulling on her nightgown, leading her toward the back door. He didn't take her downstairs. That was a death trap. He guided her toward the old storage room, the creepy one. There was a small, sketchy window that opened onto a flat section of the roof. Eleanor was tripping. "The roof, Teddy? We're gonna fall and break our backs." But Teddy just gave her a look, barked once, and nudged the window pane. She scrambled through, and he followed. The cold rain hitting her face was the best feeling ever. As they watched from the neighbor's roof, the floor of her bedroom collapsed. If Teddy hadn't pulled her to the back window, they'd be ashes right now. They made it, barely. The fire engines arrived, but it was too late. The house was toast, burnt to a crisp. Eleanor sat on the wet grass, hugging Teddy, watching her life's memories go up in a massive plume of smoke. Sirens were wailing, the lights were flashing, and the whole town was gathering, shook by the destruction. Eleanor didn't even have a pair of shoes. She had nothing. "We lost everything, Teddy," she sobbed, burying her face in his wet fur. "Everything. I'm totally broke. I'm homeless. I have no idea what's next. We're down bad." The neighborhood firemen were doing their best, but the damage was catastrophic. As the smoke cleared and the rain turned to a drizzle, Teddy pulled away from her. His ears perked up. He wasn't crying. He was staring intently at the charred remains of that storage room, the exact spot he'd been scratching at for weeks. One of the firemen, a rookie named Dave, approached her. "I'm so sorry, Mrs. Eleanor. There's nothing left to save." "The whole place is gone," Eleanor agreed, her voice a cracked whisper. But she noticed something. Teddy hadn't left that spot. He was barking softly at the debris, like he was onto a secret. Eleanor knew Teddy didn't do anything for no reason. She stumbled over to him, her bare feet careful on the wet, charred wood. The fire had melted the upper floorboards of the storage room, but beneath the main support beam, hidden in a small waterproof hollow that Silas had built years ago, something was glinting. It was a heavy, rusted iron lockbox. Silas, her husband, had always been a hustler back in his day. He was always low-key talking about a rainy day fund and how he'd make sure the fam was secured. Eleanor always thought he was just capping, a big talker. But as she walked closer to where Teddy was digging, she realized she had totally underestimated him. Teddy barked a sharp, triumphant sound. The fire had taken her house, but it had uncovered the real treasure, a bag Silas had been hiding all along. "Silas, you crazy old fool," Eleanor whispered, her heart doing mental gymnastics. "You weren't capping after all." She looked at Teddy, the stray who had saved her life. The firemen thought the dog was just tweaking from the trauma, but Eleanor knew better. The destiny of their future had just begun, and it all started with that scruffy little dog and the secret he'd been waiting for the exact right moment to reveal. The fire trucks were finally packing up, their sirens replaced by the low, haunting crackle of cooling embers. The air smelled like burnt cedar and lost dreams. Grandma Eleanor was huddled in a donated blanket, looking like a total hot mess. But her eyes were glued to Teddy. The pup was going ham on a specific patch of charred flooring where the old storage room used to be. He wasn't just digging, he was on a mission. "Teddy, chill out, honey," Eleanor whispered, her voice cracking. "The house is baked. There's nothing left to save." But Teddy didn't get the memo. He let out a sharp, bossy bark and pulled at a piece of half-burnt plywood with his teeth. Beneath the ash, a metallic glint caught the moonlight. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. She stumbled over the debris, her slippers getting ruined in the soot, and knelt beside him. There, nestled in a secret hollow beneath the foundation, was a heavy, rusted iron box. It looked like something straight out of a vintage heist movie. "No way," Eleanor breathed, her eyes going wide. "Silas, you old dog, you weren't capping after all." She remembered Silas, her late husband, always talking about security and looking out for the fam. Everyone thought he was just being extra. But seeing this box, Eleanor realized he had a side hustle she never knew about. The lock was busted from the heat, so she pried it open with a shaky hand. It was a stack of old crisp bills, genuine old-school cash, and a velvet pouch that felt heavy. When she opened the pouch, out spilled a collection of rare high-grade diamonds. We're talking ice, so bright it could blind you. There was also a handwritten note, yellowed with age, that simply said, "For a rainy day. I knew you'd find this when the time was right. S." "He didn't find this, Silas," Eleanor sobbed, looking at the dog. "Teddy found it. This little guy is the real MVP." But the glow-up didn't stop there. As Eleanor sat in the back of a neighbor's car that night, clutching the box, she noticed Teddy looking out the window at the town's main character, a local greedy developer named Mr. Sterling. Sterling had been trying to buy Eleanor's land for years to build a soulless shopping mall, offering her pennies on the dollar. He was standing across the street, looking at the ruins of her house with a smug, "I told you so" look on his face. He probably figured she'd have to sell now, just to survive. "He thinks I'm down bad," Eleanor muttered to Teddy. "He thinks I'm gonna fold." The next morning, the news of the miracle dog had already spread through Oak Ridge like a viral TikTok. People were calling Teddy a hero for saving Eleanor, but they didn't know about the ice in the box. Eleanor decided to keep that part low-key. She checked into a local motel, but she wasn't planning on staying there for long. With the cash and the diamonds, she didn't just have enough to rebuild. She had enough to flex. She called up a high-end architect and told him she wanted a house that would make the whole town shake. But she had one specific request. "I want a custom 5-star suite built into the master bedroom for the king of the house." Teddy, sitting on the motel bed, let out a satisfied woof. However, things were about to get sketchy. Mr. Sterling wasn't about to let the land go that easily. He knew Eleanor didn't have insurance, or so he thought. And he started playing dirty. That afternoon, a shady lawyer showed up at her motel door with a stack of papers, claiming that the city was condemning her land due to safety hazards from the fire. "You got 48 hours to vacate the property and sell it to Mr. Sterling, or the city takes it for nothing," the lawyer said, looking all pressed in his cheap suit. Eleanor felt the panic rising again. She was just an old lady, and these guys were sharks. But then she felt a warm weight on her foot. Teddy was standing there, his ears perked up, growling low in his throat. He stared at the lawyer's briefcase, then at the lawyer's face, and did something he'd never done before. He bit the lawyer's pant leg and pulled him toward the door. "Get this mutt off me!" the lawyer yelled, looking totally clapped. "He's not a mutt," Eleanor said, a new fire in her eyes. "He's my legal counsel, and we're not selling. Not now, not ever." As the lawyer scrambled away, Eleanor realized that the fire hadn't just uncovered Silas's treasure. It had uncovered her own main character energy. But she still had a huge problem. How was she going to fight a millionaire developer and a corrupt city council? She looked at Teddy. He was staring at the iron box, specifically at a small, hidden compartment at the very bottom that Eleanor had missed in her excitement. "There's more?" she asked, her heart racing. Teddy nudged a small, tarnished key that had fallen out of the box. It wasn't for a house or a car. It had a logo on it, the logo of the local Oak Ridge Historical Society, which Silas used to be the president of. "The plot thickens," Eleanor whispered. The destiny Teddy was leading her toward wasn't just about money. It was about a secret that could take down Mr. Sterling and save the whole town. But she had to move fast before Sterling's goons clamped her land for good. The sun hadn't even fully clocked in the next morning when Grandma Eleanor and Teddy were already on the move. Eleanor was feeling a mix of main character energy and straight-up nerves. She was rocking a pair of oversized shades and an old trench coat, clutching that tarnished key like it was her life support. Behind them, the ruins of her house were still smoldering, a grim reminder. Sterling was waiting like a vulture to swoop in and snatch her land. All right, Teddy, let's see if we can find out what Silas was really cooking back in the day, Eleanor whispered as she pulled her beat-up sedan into the parking lot of the Oak Ridge Historical Society. The Historical Society was a dusty old vibe. Creaky floors, smelling like old paper and mothballs. The lady at the front desk, Mrs. Gable, was a Karen of the highest order, always looking for a reason to shush someone. She looked at Eleanor and her scruffy dog like they were something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe. No pets allowed, Eleanor. You know the rules. Don't be extra, Mrs. Gable huffed, adjusting her spectacles. But Teddy wasn't having it. He didn't bark. He just gave her this look, a cold, calculated stare that actually made Mrs. Gable flinch. Eleanor didn't wait for permission. She marched straight to the private archives in the basement, Teddy leading the way like he had the building's GPS downloaded into his brain. Down in the basement, it was straight up spooky. Rows and rows of locked metal cabinets filled the room. Eleanor pulled out the key Teddy had nudged her toward. Her hands were shaking. "If this doesn't fit, we're down bad, Teddy," she muttered. She found a drawer labeled Property Records, 1950 to 1970, and slid the key into the lock. It clicked. Pure satisfaction. Inside was a thick file, with her husband Silas's handwriting all over it. As she flipped through the pages, her jaw literally hit the floor. "Oh my God, Teddy, look at this," she gasped. The file contained original blueprints and environmental surveys of the town. It turned out that the land Mr. Silas was working on, Sterling wanted to build his mall on Eleanor's land, and the surrounding forest was actually a protected wetland with a massive underground spring that supplied the town's water. But that wasn't even the tea. The real shook moment was a document showing that Mr. Sterling's grandfather had illegally moved the boundary lines decades ago to steal land from the town. Wait, it gets even crazier. There was a second deed hidden in the back. Silas had quietly bought the mineral rights to the entire area before he passed. That meant Mr. Sterling couldn't dig a single hole for his mall without Eleanor's permission. He wasn't just a bully, he was a fraud. "Sterling thinks he's the goat, but he's actually clownin'," Eleanor laughed, tears pricking her eyes. "He tried to burn us out, but he just set fire to his own empire." Suddenly, the basement door creaked open. Teddy's fur stood on end, and he let out a low, menacing growl. Standing there in the shadows was Mr. Sterling himself, looking pressed and holding a cigar. He had followed them. "Give me the file, Eleanor," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave. "Don't make this ugly. You're an old lady with a stray dog. Nobody's gonna believe your story over mine. Just take the payout and ghost this town." He stepped forward, looking like he was ready to throw hands to get that folder. Eleanor backed away, her heart hammering against her ribs. She felt trapped. But Teddy wasn't scared. He stepped right between Eleanor and the millionaire, baring his teeth in a way that looked straight up savage. "You think you're the big man on campus, Sterling?" Eleanor said, her voice gaining strength as she hugged the file to her chest. "But you forgot one thing. This stray saved me from a fire you probably started, and he's about to save this whole town from you." Teddy let out a roar, not a bark, but a soul-shaking roar, and lunged toward Sterling. He didn't bite him, but he chased him right back toward the stairs, nipping at his expensive leather shoes until the developer tripped over a box of old records, looking totally clapped. Eleanor grabbed Teddy's collar. "Come on, buddy. We gotta get this to the sheriff before Sterling's goons show up to delete the evidence." They dashed out of the Historical Society, leaving a fuming Mr. Sterling behind in the dust. But as they jumped into the car, Eleanor noticed a black SUV pulling out behind them. Sterling wasn't giving up. He was low-key sending his hit squad to finish the job. "Hold on tight, Teddy," Eleanor yelled, hitting the gas. "It's about to get bumpy." The chase was on. An 80-year-old grandma, a hero dog, and a file that could change the map of Oak Ridge forever. The destiny Silas had planned for them was finally unfolding, and it was pure chaos. The sun hadn't even fully clocked in the next morning, but Grandma Eleanor and Teddy were already on the move. Eleanor was feeling a wild mix of main character energy and straight-up nerves. She was rocking a pair of oversized shades and her late husband's old trench coat, clutching that tarnished key like it was her literal life support. Behind them, the smoking ruins of her house were a grim reminder that Mr. Sterling was waiting like a vulture to swoop in and snatch her land for his trashy mall project. "All right, Teddy. Let's see if we can find out what Silas was really cooking back in the day," Eleanor whispered as she pulled her beat-up sedan into the parking lot of the Oak Ridge Historical Society. The Historical Society was a dusty old vibe. Creaky floors, smelling like old paper, mothballs, and Grandma's attic. Gable was a Karen of the highest order, always looking for a reason to shush someone or rain on their parade. She looked at Eleanor and her scruffy dog like they were something she'd found on the bottom of her shoe after a long walk. "No pets allowed, Eleanor. You know the rules. Don't be extra," Mrs. Gable huffed, adjusting her spectacles with a look that said she was ready to call the manager. But Teddy wasn't having it. He didn't bark. He just gave her this look, a cold, calculated, I know your secrets stare that actually made Mrs. Gable flinch and look away. Eleanor didn't wait for permission. She marched straight to the private archives in the basement, Teddy leading the way like he had the building's entire GPS blueprint downloaded into his brain. Down in the basement, it was straight up spooky. Rows and rows of locked metal cabinets filled the room, holding the town's deepest secrets. Eleanor pulled out the tarnished key Teddy had nudged her toward in the motel. Her hands were shaking so hard she almost dropped it. "If this doesn't fit, we're down bad, Teddy," she muttered, her heart thumping in her chest. She found a drawer labeled Property Records, 1950 to 1970, and slid the key into the lock. It clicked. Pure satisfaction. Inside was a thick, leather-bound file with her husband Silas's handwriting all over it. As she flipped through the yellowed pages, her jaw literally hit the floor. "Oh my God, Teddy, look at this," she gasped, her eyes scanning the blueprints. The file contained original surveys and environmental reports of the entire county. It turned out that the land Mr. Sterling wanted to build his mall on, Eleanor's land and the surrounding forest, was actually a protected wetland, with a massive underground spring that supplied the town's entire water supply. But that wasn't even the tea. The real shook moment was a document showing that Mr. Sterling's grandfather had illegally moved the boundary lines decades ago to steal land from the town's public park system. Wait, it gets even crazier. There was a second deed hidden in a secret pocket at the back of the folder. Silas had quietly bought the mineral rights to the entire area before he passed. That meant Mr. Sterling couldn't dig a single hole for his mall foundation without Eleanor's explicit permission. He wasn't just a bully. He was a fraud who was about to get canceled. "Sterling thinks he's the GOAT, but he's actually clownin'," Eleanor laughed, tears of relief pricking her eyes. "He tried to burn us out to make a buck, but he just set fire to his own empire." Suddenly, the heavy basement door creaked open, echoing through the hollow room. Teddy's fur stood on end, and he let out a low, menacing growl that vibrated through the floor. Standing there in the shadows was Mr. Sterling himself, looking pressed in an expensive suit and holding a half-lit cigar. He had followed them, and he looked like he was ready for smoke. "Give me the file, Eleanor," Sterling said, his voice dropping an octave into a threatening growl. "Don't make this ugly. You're just an old lady with a stray dog. Nobody's gonna believe your story over mine. Just take the payout I offered and ghost this town before things get worse." He stepped forward, his eyes narrowing, looking like he was ready to throw hands just to get that folder. Eleanor backed away into the corner, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She felt vulnerable and small. But Teddy wasn't scared for a second. He stepped right between Eleanor and the millionaire, baring his teeth in a way that looked straight up savage. "You think you're the big man on campus, Sterling?" Eleanor said, her voice gaining a sudden sharp strength as she hugged the file to her chest. "But you forgot one thing. This stray saved me from a fire you probably started, and he's about to save this whole town from a snake like you." Teddy let out a roar, not a bark, but a soul-shaking roar that sounded like a jungle cat, and lunged towards Sterling. He didn't bite him, but he used his body to push the man back. He chased him right toward the stairs, nipping at the heels of his expensive leather shoes, until the developer tripped over a box of old census records, looking totally clapped and pathetic. Eleanor grabbed Teddy's collar as they sprinted past the fallen businessman. "We gotta get this to the sheriff before Sterling's goons show up to delete the evidence, and us with it." They dashed out of the Historical Society, leaving a fuming, soot-covered Mr. Sterling behind in the dust. But as they jumped into her old sedan and peeled out of the lot, Eleanor noticed a dark, tinted black SUV pulling out right behind them. Sterling wasn't giving up that easily. He was low-key sending his hit squad to finish the job on the open road. "Hold on tight, Teddy," Eleanor yelled, hitting the gas and feeling the engine roar. "It's about to get bumpy." The chase was on through the winding back roads of Oak Ridge, an 80-year-old grandma, a hero dog, and a file full of tea that could change the map of the town forever. The destiny Silas had planned for them was finally unfolding in real time, and it was pure chaos. The tires of Eleanor's old sedan screeched like a banshee as she floored it out of the Historical Society parking lot. In the rear-view mirror, that black SUV with the tinted windows was glued to her bumper, and she could see two guys in suits looking mad sus through the windshield. Eleanor's heart was drumming against her ribs like a heavy trap beat in a club. "Teddy, they're thirsty for this file, buddy. We gotta lose 'em before we hit the main road and get boxed in," Eleanor shouted over the roar of her struggling engine. Teddy wasn't just sitting there looking cute. He was checking the perimeter, jumping from the front seat to the back, his eyes locked on the chasing vehicle with a focus that was next level. He let out a sharp, commanding bark and nudged Eleanor's arm toward a narrow, overgrown dirt side road that led into the deep Oak Ridge woods. "The backwoods? Teddy, that road is trash. We're gonna bottom out and get stuck for sure." But Teddy nudged her again, more pressed this time, his eyes practically screaming for her to trust him. Eleanor took a deep breath, yanked the wheel hard to the right, and dived into the wall of trees. The SUV followed, but their fancy, low-profile tires were struggling with the deep ruts and the low-hanging branches that were slapping against their windshield. Eleanor, who had lived in Oak Ridge her whole life, knew these woods like the back of her hand. She used to hike here back when she and Silas were dating. She was drifting that old sedan like a pro, dust clouds billowing up behind her to blind the goons in the SUV. "How you like them apples, Sterling? You think your money can buy you skills on a dirt road?" she laughed, feeling a sudden rush of adrenaline that made her feel 50 years younger. Suddenly, the road ended abruptly at a washed-out bridge over a rocky creek. Eleanor slammed on the brakes, stopping just inches from the jagged edge of the ravine. The black SUV pulled up right behind them, blocking their only escape route. Two guys stepped out, looking salty and covered in dust as they straightened their suits. "End of the line, Grandma," one of them smirked, reaching into his waistband in a way that looked majorly sketchy. "Just hand over the folder, and nobody has to get clapped today." Eleanor clutched the file to her chest, her eyes darting around for a plan B as the forest felt like it was closing in. She felt cornered, down bad, and totally vulnerable for the first time since the fire started. But then she looked at Teddy. The dog wasn't looking at the goons. He was looking at a small, hidden trail to the left, a path only a dog or a very desperate hiker could take. "Get the file to the sheriff," she whispered, trying to shove the folder under his collar where it would be safe.